the highest attainment for human life, or for my life, that I can point to is the idea of effortlessly relating. We are in relationship with, well, ourselves, each other, nature, culture, loads of stuff all the time. And for me, it seems that I can do that more or less effortlessly. And for me, circling has been the practice that has best helped me to relate effortlessly to other people. The tension between really welcoming myself and welcoming the other and staying in that space seems to be so central to the practice.
The container is now open. Peter Munthe-Kaas is an absolute master from the tradition of circling Europe, and he blends his discipline of surrendered leadership with a lifelong practice of Tai Chi and concepts from Daoism. This summer, Sai and I actually had the privilege to practice with him at Circling Europe's yearly festival. There, we were able to be in spaces led by him and then also just chat with him. And we just knew that we needed to bring his presence and insights to the container. So this is that episode, and we're really excited. But before we launch into our conversation, I just want to say thank you to our patrons. They went to patreon.com/thecontainer and they committed to make small monthly donations that help offset the considerable costs of this show. We're extremely grateful to them, and we have been making a lot of content available exclusively to paying patrons. That includes our series The Way That Can Be Told, where Sai and I actually go chapter by chapter through the Tao Te Ching, and it's really aligned very well with this episode. So if you like this kind of stuff, go to Patreon and check out The Way That Can Be Told. Patrons also get the newsletter a few days early, which is, very, very nice. Thank you so much to our patrons, and also thank you to everyone who supports us in every way that you can, from liking and subscribing, to rating and reviewing, to leaving a comment, to sharing this with people who you think will really enjoy it. We appreciate your support. Now on to the discussion with Peter Munthe-Kaas. Peter Munthe-Kaas, thank you for joining us on the container. We're excited to have you. We kind of knew we were going to have you on because we started this journey with the Tao Te Ching, where we're going through this long process on our Patreon where we're circling each chapter, and then we saw this that you had given this presentation at last year's Transformational Connection Festival, the Tao of Circling. And it was like, oh, okay, this guy is like, it sees something close to, or yeah, it just felt like, oh, this is a guy to talk to. And then when we went to the festival this year, we got the chance to sit in a surrendered leadership group with you, well, several times with you in the room there. And then we also got to be in a experience that you were leading. So then I think I got a really rich appreciation for your ability as a facilitator, and just kind of holding the space. So that little introduction for the listeners and the viewers kind of hopefully gives them a taste, but maybe I'd like to invite you into this space and maybe share a little bit about how you came to the practice, or what the practice means for your path.
Yeah, sure. So I encountered circling for the first time in 2015. And for me, it was a bit of a shock, or like I didn't know if I liked it at first. I went to a weekend workshop in Copenhagen, and yeah, I was very impacted by it. But I also immediately signed up for Circling Europe's 6-month training afterwards. So I must have liked something. And then I remember just struggling a lot on the SAS and like feeling very angry and not understanding what we were doing and why we were doing it, but still kind of appreciating the process of it. And then the most significant moment for me was at the last of those 3 weekends that are on the SAS. I remember having this question coming to me, and it's still very alive for me. That was, am I really allowed to live like this? Like, can I really move in the world with this amount of freedom and with this amount of openness? Is that allowed? And then, of course, there's a follow-up question that's like, and where am I actually looking for permission? And that was really significant for me, and something I took with me when I started leading in Copenhagen after that with my partner. And we really just jumped into it from there and led loads and loads of evenings and then weekends and then retreats in Scandinavia for quite some years there. And yeah, it did really impact my life. Or like I was on a trajectory towards more presence-based practices, but there's something with circling and surrendered leadership in particular that just really resonated with me after I had been through some struggles. Yeah, and now it's a very big part of my work life also, like I lead weekends and retreats and such. I just finished 2 retreats with my partner here in Norway, where I am now. So we've had 2 quite small, intimate retreats with 10 people on each, where we've really like dived into the practice and living together in the practice. Yeah, maybe I can just tell you what like my understanding of this paradigm is.
Yes.
Because it connects to some of the stuff we talked about at the festival, like why I'm inspired by Daoism and how I see that connects to these practices. And it's like the highest attainment for human life, or for my life, that I can point to is the idea of effortlessly relating. So it's like we are in relationship with, well, ourselves, each other, nature, culture, loads of stuff all the time. And for me, it seems that I can do that more or less effortlessly, more or less in with what is there. And for me, circling has been the practice that has best helped me to relate effortlessly to other people. It's like, yeah, I guess we'll get more into this, but really the tension between really welcoming myself and welcoming the other and staying in that space seems to be so central to the practice. And that's where, like, that's the sweet spot I want to be in, and that's the reason why I practice, at least, to find that place where it's like, I am here and you're here and we're here together, and I don't have to collapse or fight to be there with you. Yeah, I don't know if that was an introduction to me, but that's some stuff that I'm interested in.
So if I'm listening right, Peter is just reminding us that circling is this meditative practice that weaves in a sense of effortlessness to our process of connecting. And I think that, confronts us with this central insight of Daoism, which is Wu Wei, or do nothing, which you can see written out right here behind me. Only a few minutes into the conversation, and my central nervous system, is already sinking down into the chair. My spirit is becoming like water. That's the sort of Peter effect I'm calling it. So, also along this kind of Taoist line, it's like mastery of human connection loops around from the sophisticated gathering of tools into something much simpler. Not easy, okay? Not easy, but simple. So, as Peter will show us, circling is this process of unlearning, okay? And he also gives us a whole new framework to think about it using Tai Chi. This is an ancient Chinese martial art that is this embodied way of experiencing the cosmic forces of yin and yang. And it's this right here that where you really start to feel, oh, this is like a whole different way of approaching circling. It's really exciting.
Something I love about how you described that is that it's so easy to understand, but then when you really zoom in on kind of parts of what you just described, it's so deep. Like there's so much depth to being in relationship with another person. I think there's like this kind of surface level, maybe I imagine people who have never heard of circling and like what their maybe some of their mental construct of what relating is, and then all the way down to someone who's been practicing pretty regularly for 10 years, like what that means. And some of the depth that I've discovered more recently is just my own body responding outside of my thought formations, like to other people that I'm in proximity to, and being able to kind of separate that from what's going on in my mind. And like I do this practice sometimes in a circle where I face each person and give myself like 60 seconds with each person and really try to like, what is happening in me, and kind of zoom in, zoom out, then move to the next person, zoom in, zoom out. So I was just really appreciating your description and how easy it is to understand, but how like, I mean, there's just like a lifetime of depth in there as well.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say, yeah, it's difficult. Like it's tricky to really find that, to really find myself in that good place and attention. So it does seem to require practice, even though the practice is really to release tensions, as I see it, or like unlearn patterns that are actually not serving me. And there is a way in which it seems true for me that it's always available.
Yeah.
And you don't actually have to have done anything to be able to do it.
Right.
Or like, in some ways, to just like, well, be present with the truth of what is and move from there. Yeah. And then on the other hand, like that's really difficult. And I've certainly needed a lot of practice to move towards that. And I'm definitely not saying that I'm there. And I don't have any. I don't think that I will get there. But there's like this unlearning process that seems to make my life and my relationships just a lot more beautiful to be in, and a lot nicer to navigate in.
For me, even possible to be in. I think there were years in my life where it was not possible for me to have a relationship that worked sustainably over time. Yeah. Love that.
Something that's really sticking out to me is this connection to um, a part of the Tao Te Ching where Lao Tzu talks about how, scholars learn more every day and I forget more every day. And that, like, um, hearing you talk about the practice as a process of unlearning is actually, you know, a better way of thinking about it than, oh, I'm learning all of these skills and I'm getting so sophisticated at managing all of these things. That there's actually a way that circling can be a practice of actually cutting out all of these sophisticated tools you've created to navigate interpersonally. And it's interesting when I look at it that way. A lot of my most difficult patterns were all constructed, like I learned how to do all of those things. Those were things I taught myself, or the world helped teach me about how I needed to show up, needed to, in heavy quotes. Like, yeah, and I'm really appreciating just there's something like sweet and quiet and powerful about looking at it as unlearning.
Yeah, and it's also very concrete for me when I like the biggest issue I see for people who start leading circling is that they want to lean very heavily on the form and do it right. But the doing right really gets in the way of being there with the truth of your experience. So it's like, of course, there is a form in a certain way, but there's also a letting go of that form to allow the spontaneity of life that's already there. And for me, that's really what the practice is about. Like, like I have a lot of stuff on my backbone, or like a lot of heuristics and ways I like to do stuff. But it's like, can I not try to do any of that, but rather just be present, and then it kind of shows up by itself. Um, at least that's the way I see it. Very, very similar to, I didn't say that before, but like I've practiced Tai Chi for many, many years, and Tai Chi has very much the same idea of unlearning body patterns that are not serving me to actually be, well, what you would call relaxed in Tai Chi, which is not what we typically see as relaxed. Like what most people call relaxed, we would in Tai Chi would call collapsed, or like, well, just uh, in flight, or like over relaxed in some ways. It's like, how can I let go of the fight patterns and the flight patterns or collapse patterns that I have, to be present with myself and be present with you at the same time.
Yeah, and as I'm listening to you speak, I'm like scanning my body. I'm like, oh, why I'm like tightening over here and then leaning back and tight, and just it makes me want to learn more about Tai Chi. It makes me think of Jay DeMaio as well, who we had on a few months ago, who we were kind of comparing notes with Qigong and circling, and kind of the way that those two practices have overlap. Um, and I'm wondering, Peter, the unlearning, would you say that that kind of correlates with what we're describing as the surrender and surrendered leadership? Or what is like how would you describe the difference between the practice of circling or transformational connection, or whatever we're calling it these days, and surrendered leadership? Or maybe those were two separate questions.
So for me, circling is a form of relating, and in the tradition that I've been in mostly, which is the Circling Europe tradition, is based on some principles about how we show up with each other, and how we want to be with each other when we're practicing. And it's very much about, well, it has some of what I just talked about, like owning experience, which is a pretty deep principle in my experience, where it's like, yeah, well, I can tell you a little bit about my process and that, just to give you a sense of it.
Yeah.
It's like, so what I find is that a lot of people, when they encounter this principle and they then do circling, is that they will say something like, I really want to own that I'm angry with you or whatever. And it's like, well, yeah, in some way it is a way of owning experience, but like, is it really? Like, what's the deeper layer of this? Why are you saying that you really want to own this if you already did it? Like, if it's just your truth. So it's like, maybe there's something else happening. Maybe there's a bit of shame about having this experience and not wanting to just bring the anger or whatever. Something I did for quite some years, and I still do to a certain extent, was this just owning everything that was going on in me. It's like, I'm a little bit nervous, and when I look at the screen now, I'm a little bit worried that my background is not all right, and like all of these ends of my experience. But at some point, I also realized that that was actually an avoidance to get away from the truth of my experience. That's often a lot more immediate. And right now it would be something like, oh, I'm actually quite enjoying being here with you. And then all that other stuff kind of drops away, and it's not, that's not what it's about, really. And so for me, owning experience now is more about, can I cut away all the avoidance noise and just go to like what's actually important and here. Yeah, and the question you asked was like, yeah, then what's the difference to surrendered leadership? And for me, surrendered leadership points straight to Wu Wei, or this effortless relating. It's like, can I surrender to what is actually happening in me in this moment and lead myself from there, allow that to move me in the world? So for me, it's, you can say, maybe you can, well, other schools do that, so you can do circling without surrender leadership. I'm not sure how I would do it. Like, the way I lead is definitely grounded in the idea of really starting from like, yeah, what's here? And then my surrender might be that I want to lead some practices with these people because that seems to be the most alive in me right now. It might also be, oh, I was wanting to lead practices, but actually sitting down here, I don't know what to do, and I feel a bit sad and collapsed. And then trusting that there's actually wisdom in that also, and that just staying with that is the best thing I can do in that moment. Mm-hmm. And the challenge of that for me is that everything can be avoidance, and this is like a thing that has been very up for me the last year's time. That is like, I can't actually know if I'm with the truth outside of presence. And it's like leaning out and not saying anything in a circle can be beautiful leadership. And it can just be perfect and exactly what aligns with the space. And it can also be avoidance. It can be me not wanting to step more into an active leadership because I somehow believe that it would be wrong to facilitate or to force anything that's mine. And if that's like the edge, well, then apparently I'm avoiding something there. I'm not surrendering to what's there. And the other way around, stepping into a space and immediately starting to go like, okay, we're going to do this pair practice, and then we're going to do this, can also be a form of avoidance if what's really there is, I don't know the right thing to do would be right now, and maybe I need a little bit of time to settle. It's like, that's how I navigate the surrendered leadership, is this, like, can I really trust in the present moment that what's going on for me is true, and bring it.
Peter's insight into owning our experience is the kind of clarity and subtlety that makes talking to a master so important on the path. And as he puts it, anything can be avoidance. And just holding on to that insight alone feels like such medicine inside of me. It's the unknowability that allows us to just let go of trying to know. Like, trying to know isn't where we need to place all of our effort. Instead of placing effort into that, we can go into surrender, right? And that's, part of this school of circling Europe that is just so essential, the surrender part of surrendered leadership. That is what offers us a way out. So rather than focusing on what we know or what we think we're supposed to know, we just simply trust in the process. Still, can Peter, with all of his years of experience, give us a way to more easily, more quickly detect avoidance? As Peter demonstrates, it's like whether or not we have really good tools for detecting avoidance, and really for any part of the practice, the relational arts give us something that very few other modalities give you, which is in the moment feedback. And it's a discipline that unfolds over time. So we're able to look backward at our practice and see, I was avoiding there, wasn't I? And then we're able to kind of adjust our mental models and our practice. Through the power of feedback and through this unfolding discipline, we are able to give more and more of our connection to this effortless way of being. And that's a really hopeful message, right? So it's like our unnoticed avoidance becomes noticed avoidance. And then our noticed avoidance becomes owned experience. As Peter says, the truth keeps expanding. Yeah, I have such a struggle with avoidance, in multiple meanings of that sentence. And what I like really hunger for right now, listening to you, is if you have developed any kind of sense of smell around, like, oh, I'm avoiding right now. I know for me, I am just starting to have a better sense of, like, oh, wait a second, I'm using my circling tools right now to avoid. And yeah, so I think I'm really seeking in you right now, or like kind of, yeah, I'm trying to pull that out of you right now. It's a funny way to ask a question. I guess I could just ask the question.
Are you avoiding just directly asking the question?
Yeah, I needed to demonstrate for the audience what my avoidance can look like.
So the question is, do I have concrete tools for navigating this?
Yeah, or even just like, how is it like developing I use the phrase sense of smell, but that kind of like that special sense that oh, this actually isn't surrender, this is avoidance. And
yeah, well, it makes me just think, like, my heuristics are not perfect, and this one about avoidance is definitely not perfect. It's just in me a lot these days, and calling it avoidance, like, my fear of doing that is that it actually is a bit violent towards the parts of me that are scared. So when I say it as avoidance, like for myself, I hold it quite playfully. That it's like, oh, am I avoiding something? Like, what is the deeper truth here? But I also just want to emphasize that avoidance can also be trying to reveal something that's really deep, if that's not what I actually want to do. Because that's what we do in circling. We have to go really deep with each other, and we have to be vulnerable. And some of the most beautiful experiences I have is where I realize that I don't actually want to. Don't want to be particularly vulnerable with you right now, and I don't feel safe enough to start showing you what my insights look like. And I do want to be with you, but there's like a boundary there, and I want to show you that boundary. But and then maybe we can meet there, and maybe it changes. But like, yeah, but and that feels significant. And yeah, how do I sense it? I don't actually know. There is some kind of felt sense experience there in presence. I was just checking right now. It's like, is there something, do I have an experience of avoiding something here right now? And I can't track it right now.
Yeah, I'm hearing there's there's some sort of honing that happens over time in developing trust with self, that staying true to the present moment is going to produce like the discernment of what is true. Like there's something with those words, like trust, discernment, presence, and coherence, or connection. Yeah, connection with yourself to that. And that sometimes you hit it exactly on the mark and sometimes you don't. And that when you don't, you figure that out after the fact. I mean, it's like meditation in a way. I mean, it is like meditation in a way. Over time you're like, oh, was I, like you think, oh, my mind was so clear and crystal clear. And then you reach another level of meditation where you're like, oh, wow, that actually wasn't like as deep as I could go. And I thought that was the depth. I don't know. There's like an unlayering or unfolding of what it means, but then you try to go and grab it with words and it's like falls through your fingers.
Yeah, and then the cool thing about circling and other relational practices is that we get feedback from others. So it's like one of the edges I have when I lead is that I love to like point out the nuances of the practice, and like going into like, oh yeah, but there's actually it seems like there was a slight boundary violation here, and it seems like this person is now responding to that with a bit of charge, and maybe there's another way you could say the thing you just said that would make it land in a different way. And I love that, and I love having those details, but in some way it's also not honoring of the level where people are just at. That like, and it can give this impression that you have to be perfect to say anything. And a lot of the beauty I've experienced in circling and surrender leadership circles is when I bring something and it's not very precise, but it is alive in some way. And then I get feedback and it's like, oh, okay, I was actually avoiding part of the message there, or I didn't dare to bring it with the force that it came with. So maybe I said that I'm like annoyed by something, but actually I know very well in the moment that I'm angry with you because of this particular thing. And then it's like, oh, I was actually avoiding that. Now I can bring it to where it belongs. But then I realized that, oh, I'm actually bringing it with charge towards you rather than owning what it's about for me. And it's like, oh, wow, it was actually about this thing in me. And I started out with just being generally annoyed. And like, I imagine that you've been through some processes like that. And most people that do circling have those experiences of like, oh, wow, the truth keeps expanding somehow. Yeah. So I don't want to blame the avoidance. Yeah.
I get so excited talking about circling sometimes. I'm just like, that you had that experience or similar to that. I mean, it's just so fun that it's so so simple, yet so complex, yet so relatable. Yeah, there's just it's just such a beautiful thing.
Yeah, I'm noticing there's almost like a physical energy that's like wafting over from your chair from the conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah, it makes me feel like we picked a good topic for a podcast.
Yeah,
I love talking about that. Okay, so avoidance is proving a really fertile concept here. Obviously, it shows up in all of our relationships in some way or another, but it's also this continuous feature of the practice itself. Efforting toward full awareness and radically authentic disclosure is not the same thing as full awareness and authentically relating disclosure. But avoidance proves tricky, right? Because we often don't know we're doing it as we're doing it. So the use of feedback empowers us through that process. Because other people can like so easily see those parts of us that we're avoiding. But Peter reminds us that direct and honest feedback, when it comes from a place of love, that's a really important point, also serves as an enormous relief of the burden of avoidance. As he describes in the case of anxiety, people often know when they're feeling anxious, even when they're locked in an attempt to hide that they're feeling that way. If we're able to acknowledge it and bring it into the space, as long as that's from a place of love, we shoot like this magical healing ray from our heart to theirs, so to speak. Feedback and avoidance are these two really powerful concepts to start seeing how we relate in the practice and how our presence itself forms that connection and forms the healing power of the field. And maybe that's really the effortlessness that Peter is ultimately getting at, that just being there is a lot. And as we're there, we're able to give feedback, which is so obvious to us and so life-changing for the other, and vice versa. The thing about avoidance for me that I find fascinating, that connects to the feedback like you're talking about, is that in my experience often it's like a blind spot where you like, it's like a blind spot where I often just am completely on a conscious word level, completely unaware of it. And then other people, especially while circling, can just see it from a mile away. It's like it's so obvious to them. Just a couple of days ago, we were running a circle over here, and I was like I was going into this process with someone, and I thought I was getting a deep scoop, Peter. I was like starting to cry, and I felt so raw and like, wow. And I was like really getting to my spot. I was like, oh no, what I just, I was like really working the words into just to really get it. And then I kind of pull out and I feel like I'm out of the basement and I'm done. I've washed up on shore. And then a really great circler we work with, Steven, he just looks at me and goes like, I feel like you were avoiding something. It's
That was
like,
his one piece of
yeah,
feedback.
that was just like how he was, yeah, observing. Yeah, and it's just like, and it was true, it was like once that was opened up, I could see and feel that avoidance, but it was like, I mean, in some ways it was just so beautiful because yeah, it's beautiful when those doors are open and there's so much more room in the present than you even thought there were, even when you thought you went deep. But I don't know, that really came up for me in this conversation, that that recent
And it's why we
experience.
need each other,
Right. Yeah, and why feedback is so yeah, that feedback of circling gives you such like rapid self-awareness.
Yeah, the way, like something quite often talked about is this way in which we already know each other. Like at least that's probably a partial truth, but I hold that as very true. That as soon as we meet, we kind of already know each other. It's not that we don't notice the ways in which people are shy or tense or anxious or whatever. It registers quite immediately. But often we don't really want to speak that out to each other or make it conscious, because that could be uncomfortable in many ways. And for me, it seems that often we don't want to tell people, like we don't want to tell people who they are, but we also don't want, it's like we think that they don't know who they are. And then we won't say it because it's a bit awkward if we start mentioning for someone that they seem to be anxious. But people who are anxious know that they're anxious. Like they struggle with it all the time. And it's a big part of their life to like have that experience and then try to hide it, and imagining that people are actually seeing them in it. So like typically it's quite a relief for people to just be met with this, like, oh, like this is what I'm experiencing with you.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Or they like really rail against it. Like, I have no idea what you're talking about. That has happened. Also, that is also a way it can look.
There's
I
some,
think it depends a lot on how you bring it. Also,
Yes.
like for me, it has this quality of like, well, that's a heuristic that I use in circling. That if I'm not coming from a place of love, I should definitely not talk about other people or their experience, or even ask questions, because the question will be charged with whatever is going on in me.
Yes.
So it's like, if that's where I am, then maybe it's better that I just say what's going on in me first. So I'm like, can show that, and then maybe we can get to a point where I can say something about you that might land in a good way, because I'm actually coming from openness and curiosity and love.
That is a hard learning lesson for me. I am that is one that I step in it. I'm particularly thinking about my teenage child and the teenage children that I work with on a regular basis as well. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm also like, the way I'm taking that is there's a way that love is a force you can put. It's almost like putting connection, the power of connecting as the central feature of the experience. Is like, I want to connect, or like I want to actually
Yeah.
be here with you. Yeah, and when, I don't know, the the power, like for instance, when someone gives you the gift of saying like, I'm experiencing you as anxious, and you are feeling anxious and trying to hide it, there is this gift of like, oh yeah, I don't have to hide that I'm anxious. I don't have to. There's like, why was I putting this job on me, this like task to not burden other people with the idea that I could be anxious, or like protect myself from other people knowing that. And then, often when you're hiding something, like 75% of your mind is then anxious about, are you hiding it well enough? Or like, it's like all of this mental energy around not connecting and preventing true connection. And then this like doorway opens where or it could be really easy, and we could connect here. So there's something in what you're describing which is it's so gentle, but it's really relieving. It like moves a lot of stuff, even though it's a very gentle move, or it
Which is
can be
again
gentle.
back to that makes me think of the I Ching, the gentle wind, or the wind.
So as we talked a little bit about before, Tai Chi forms a core part of Peter's practice, and he's been doing it for 25 years. So we know we wanted to talk to him about Tai Chi, but first we need to learn just what exactly is Tai Chi, and then we can synthesize it with circling. It seems the core of the connection between these two fields for Peter is that Tai Chi develops sensitivity to where you meet the other, just like circling. But while circling does this in a modality that features a lot of talking, Tai Chi does it in an embodied way, fully embodied. And though it is technically a martial art, Peter's Tai Chi practice isn't really about committing violence. It's about, training this effortless movement in connection with the other. So by bringing these things together, we have a really full spectrum of effortlessness in connection. Also, just note how flabbergasted we are when Peter finishes his description of Tai Chi. Yeah, maybe now would be a good time to shift to how, in particular, Tai Chi has influenced your practice. And like, I think if we could begin with what exactly is Tai Chi.
Yeah. Um, well, Tai Chi is a Kung Fu system. As far as I know, Kung Fu just means practice in Tai Chi, so it's a system of martial arts practice that apparently has very ancient roots, but everything that's practiced these days is not that old. It's a relatively late practice. And it means, directly translated, Tai Chi Chuan, which is the martial art, means supreme ultimate fist or something like that. And you could also just say that it means the best martial art. So that's the that's the unironic claim that was made by someone back in the days. And the way I see it is that it's a martial art that's fight where the main tool you have for fighting is sensitivity. So you want to be as sensitive as possible towards whatever it is you're meeting, like another body, so that you're always able to respond effortlessly to what is coming at you. And then the whole practice is about how to do that. So the fight optimally becomes one of my teachers would say, like, who's the brain here? So if two bodies meet and there's a physical connection between them, only one of them can be the brain of what's going on, and you should be that if you want to win a fight. Not that I've ever fought anyone with Tai Chi. I've done a lot of partner work, and I would definitely not survive in a ring against anyone. But that's like the idea of it. And then most of the stuff people know about Tai Chi typically is that it's like people doing slow movements in parks. And all of those movements are part of various systems that have different forms. And those are there to train you in how can you be effortlessly in movement with your own body, but also in connection with another body. So that's like the very basics of it. And then, yeah, I guess soon 25 years of practicing that, and it's been very significant for like my life. Before I started with Tai Chi, I wasn't really that connected to my body, or the ground for that matter. So there's something with like slowly discovering that I actually have a body, and like there's a lot going on here, and there's a lot of ways I can be in my body, and some of them seem to be serving me better. And definitely and it has definitely brought up so much sensitivity to other bodies, like in touch, but also in general, and has brought me into there's quite a deep interest in relating, like what relating actually means and how you can do that in many different ways. And for me, that translates quite beautifully into what we do in circling, and it's the same things that we seem to want to do. This, like, how can I, as I said before, be here with you and also listen to you? And that means that I have to really show up with you and show you who I am and where I am, like my boundaries, basically. Because otherwise I can't really listen to you. It's like my experience of many relationships and conversations is that you have two people that are slightly inside themselves, slightly hiding, and then they're kind of trying to throw messages at each other from in there. But it's very hard to decode the message because it comes through such a filter on both sides.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of noise. And then the first practice in Tai Chi would be like the first energy of Tai Chi you could call Pung. And it's like, here's my boundary. It's like, I want to be here with you. I want to show up with you. And then the other would be Lü, which is, and I really want to listen to you at the same time. And then the challenge is, how can I do both? Like typically or often when someone really wants to show up, they go a bit too far and they like start telling other people who they are or what they should do, or there's this bit of fight or like violence in it. And then the other way around, when you really want to listen to someone, often there's a bit of collapse in it of like, oh, I'm going to fully welcome you, but I can't be here at the same time. So we're just going to listen to you for a while. And then there's like a fluctuation between those. And then in Tai Chi, we look at the physical sweet spot. In circling, we look at the more like relational, communicative sweet spot.
Wow.
Man, I love that model. Huh. Yeah, and I imagine that for you, there at the very end, you mentioned like in circling, we might think of more relational and in Tai Chi physical, but this was actually something I think I noted. I think I'm not just hallucinating this, but I noted this in a surrendered leadership room with you that um you seem to have a very physical understanding of the space or like of relating in the space. Like I imagine that is like very integrated for you, those two.
Yeah. At least I noticed that I relate in a very different way when I allow my body more to be there. And there's something weird for me in being in what we call a surrendered leadership space, where the invitation is to really surrender and lead. And what we often tend to do is to sit very still in a circle. And it's like, is this really what I want to do? Is this really how I want to be in this room? And what often comes from me is like, no, I want to move, I want to touch. Yeah, very, yeah. Yeah, but part of that for me is that there's a lot of animal flavors coming up for me when I am in surrender leadership spaces. Like, I just feel more like a cat in my body, or I feel more like a dog in my body, or like there's a lot of that kind of stuff coming up for me.
Mm. So the synthesis with Tai Chi brings us into the world of body, touch, and shared space. And those are core parts of any relational art. But in my experience, they're often underdeveloped or underexplored. But I think Peter's frame brings a lot of clarity. He really focuses on this boundary line between two people in any connection. So you can either meet the boundary, or you can retreat from it and cede a lot of your space to the other, or you can invade the other's space. If not literally physically, then energetically. Peter's use of Tai Chi as a way to map this interaction not only gives him better sensitivity to what's going on, it also gives him a set of tactics to use while he's there negotiating that. You also get a sense, just being in the room with him, that it has given him an enormous amount of practice time listening to where that boundary is and what the present moment calls for. And he has this felt sense he's developed around it, right? Holding this boundary where we truly want it to be ends up such an powerful long-term support system for connection. We're never spilling out over it to kind of invade other space, even when we think we're doing something positive like caretaking, and we're never unnecessarily ceding space where people are energetically spilling into our field. That's a position where, to get back to where we need to be, we end up having to do this violent shove, right, to reset everything. So keeping our practice focused on the border is something with an enormous amount of impact long term.
A couple of people in our community of practice that have really wanted to implement and be exploring more, and this is something we've kind of shifted toward, using more physicality and more touch in our circles, because they, that's how they relate, that's how they want to connect. And especially when we were doing a lot more public offerings, that was something that was very challenging to navigate with people who were brand new to the practice or brand new to that, and not to get deeply into like a conversation about safety and people, but that was what kept coming up, is consent and safety, and like, how do you navigate that? um I think I think that kind of spoke a little bit to like our um lack of experience, or like us still kind of navigating like how to hold that type of space. It seems so like different now, I don't know.
Yeah.
um but yeah, so many people want to be bringing their physical.
It's interesting like such a clear interior rule of thumb feels like what you're describing, where like not touching from a place of going beyond, extending beyond. It's like, is that how I'm here to meet you here at the true borderlands of each other? And that is often, like, for often that is. And that, like, there's a fear of it being this, like, extension beyond that border.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, and then also there's like and a lot of kinds of relating, not just touch, there's a retreat from that ends up creating this unnecessary distance. I'm really enjoying speaking through it. I'm really enjoying how visual it is in my head. It makes it very like clear how it works.
Yeah, for me, it has this very concrete quality when I move from Tai Chi and into circling. Where it's like, yeah, I'm actually here. It's like, I want you to come and meet me at my boundary. When I do Tai Chi, it's like very practical. It's like, I'm holding it right here, and you can come and you can feel it. And from there, you can feel how my body is integrated and my balance point and so on. And it's kind of the same I want to do in circling. It's like, I'm already here. And then if you want to hide a bit, that's okay. I don't mind, but I'm going to stay here with you. And it doesn't actually matter so much what you do. And I don't get enmeshed in it because I'm already doing my thing.
Yeah.
Like the enmeshment happens when I don't dare to come out here before you do it. So I need you to do it. And I do the slight manipulation by asking you a question about what's really going on. But then you answer it with a slight comeback question about why I'm asking that question. And then I get frustrated with you because it's like I don't feel like I can really be here. And like we play these games all the time, right? Like
I feel like
it's
you
not
just
that
described every argument Jonathan and I have ever had. Like, that was in the car yesterday. It's like that is the exact pattern of our if we have a conflict. It's so
yeah, and then
beautiful.
and it is scary. Like also, and I it's scary for me when like it's easier when I'm leading a space in some way because there's some role power and I'm not typically not that much in attachment relationships with the participants, but like with my partner, and my parents, and like it's a completely different ball game, and I get massively scared and then shut myself down, and then I get in trouble in all of the ways that everyone else gets in trouble. So it's like that's why I practice.
that that reminds me of something very beautiful you said right before we hit record, which was about how the to paraphrase that a massive amount of the, or maybe all of the um pain you feel as the result of the practice is from not showing up.
Yeah, yeah, we were talking about like how the leading impacts me, and if I like yeah still feel impact afterwards.
Yeah, and but like yeah, and you had said like yeah, I mean really the impact is from when I didn't fully show up, and then I'm really thinking about that reflection you just made, and the we just had about um conflict coming from stepping back and trying to operate from this like slight collapse or something, from this hiding place, and that often brings up all of this pain. It's like unintended consequences, or it's you're prioritizing your hiddenness from true connection and just clear knowing. And it's like yeah, it's interesting. So much of interpersonal pain really does come from hiding.
Yeah, and it's like, and in Tai Chi, that becomes very clear also, because as I said, like, if the sweet spot is that I have my boundary here and I'm going to stay with it, but it's also movable, so I can listen to you while I stay with myself, then it becomes very obvious that if I don't do that and I let someone push me in where I'm actually collapsed, then the only way I can get out again is by using force.
Yeah.
And then that will feel like violence to the other. And then we can go back and forth in an argument forever. Or like in Tai Chi, and like being physical with each other. And in circling, that's kind of the same, that it's like,
Yeah.
I'm slightly collapsed and you like go looking for me, and maybe you do it in not a too skillful way. So you come with some kind of assumption about how I'm doing that's not correct. And then I get really fucking fierce and angry with you, and I go like, fuck off. Uh, and then you get angry with me because like you were just trying to do your best, and now I'm suddenly angry with you and you don't know why. And then you bring charge back at me, and then we're in that dynamic.
Wow.
And then the circling way would be like, okay, can I step out of the dynamic and be more like, oh, my experience is actually this, and then bring presence myself. So what's going on for me is like, oh, now I'm sad that we're in this argument, and that was not what I intended, and I don't really know how to get out of it. Like, what's it like for you? And then maybe it's like, oh, yeah, I actually also don't want to be in this argument, and I realized that maybe this thing you said actually triggered me because of something else, and then we slowly kind of unravel what's actually going on here.
Yeah. That you're
And that,
describing is something that only recently became like more available online for me with like I even noticed it yesterday in that it was a mild conflict. It was a familiar kind of um conflict that we have it wasn't the first time we've met this moment. And but I noticed yesterday the difference was like, oh, like I kind of realized, oh, we ended up here again. And I actually didn't have a lot of charge. Like I did in the like twisted up, we're in this moment again, but then when I stepped back, I was like, wait, I don't need to, we don't have to be here. Like that just sort of, the pattern, the groove sort of got us here, but I actually don't have the level of attachment to it that I used to, or that, this would seem, or this would like seem like it warranted or something. Um so I'm saying that because I think, at least for me, that's taken like, a couple of years of practice to get to where I can like step back and go, okay, um I don't want to be in this with you right now. Like I don't want to be. You feel so sticky. You can feel so sticky.
Okay, so at this point, we really open up the rest of the conversation. Peter begins to outlay the layers of the practice that build on this sense of boundary and navigating it through the tactics of Tai Chi. We go from the conceptual approach all the way down to practical application. So, what do we do about boundary violations? How do we fully honor the true impact of what people's words and actions have on us? And how do we actually understand the impact we have on others? These are the questions. And who better to ask them with than Peter?
yeah, and it's tricky because most of us take a lot of stuff on all the time. Like that's something that's only come online for me within the last few years, with quite a bit of help from Sean Wilkinson from Circling Europe. Just noticing boundaries and boundary violations a lot more, just how often that happens, and for myself, just how normalized a patterning I have of just taking stuff if it's not a big deal. It's like, yeah, it hurts a little bit, but it's fine. Like, why why make a big deal out of this? And something I'm really practicing now is to really notice the impact of what people say to me, and just how often people say something that actually hurts. And then it's like, yeah, I can manage. I have managed most of my life, and that's cool. It's like I can use that in situations where I won't be welcomed if I really bring myself, if those exist. I think they exist sometimes, but more rarely than I would assume.
Right.
But I don't have to do it all the time.
No.
And there's this really allowing the impact and then bringing myself in that, because then I'm also not taking it on in this way where I'm retreating to my cave or like disappearing from the connection. And then the other way, really, really trying not to, like doing my best to not overstep boundaries by not telling other people about who they are at all. And that happens a lot in circling. That we subtly tell someone what their inner life looks like, or kind of have this assumption that we know something about someone else that they might not know. And typically that doesn't land that well. You like most often you will get some kind of slight rejection from saying something like that.
Yeah, I got popped there on the going through just how much you've relied in the past on being able to take it and just like be cool. I feel like so much of my socialization was built around basically no selling when my feelings were hurt, and like learning how to pretend that my feelings aren't hurt when they are, to like be cool and like keep, like just be good humored or like take a joke. And then, and among many other things of different calibers and kinds, that like it leads to where I often get the feedback that like I am like not responding to things, like I'm just so chilly sometimes, just like not showing any impact. And I, for a long time, I used to think I didn't feel impact. And then, but it's like, it's more like I've just so dissociated from like from my connection to what I feel from people. And then once you start digging into that, it's hard. It like takes a lot of time, at least for me, and I'm very early on the journey, but it's like it's very hard to even feel those emotions. Yeah. That's the crazy thing. And then once you do, it's like, oh shit, there's so much feeling here. There's just like oceans of feeling that I haven't been acknowledging for, we don't know how long this has been. It's like you wake up and it's just been this way for a long time. There's, you get hired as the mailroom guy, and there's just mail is pouring through the door, and you're like, I don't know. Yeah,
I do think it's interesting though, and I mean, maybe there's humor, maybe not. It is interesting, at least in my experience, that I think that I know when someone is hiding their feeling, but I don't know how to track my own feeling. Like, it's unconscious. My own is unconscious to me, but I can totally zero in when I think you're hiding something, which is clearly projection.
Yeah.
It's sometimes. Not. I guess it's not humorous.
It's sad.
Yeah, I'm careful with clearly projection because I hear that a lot from people, that they don't want to project on others. And again, I'm like, yeah, maybe there's a way to bring something more skillfully than as a projection. But then if all that's there is that I have this assumption about you, or like, well, then that's what's available to actually open the connection. And often there is some truth in it. It's just that truth won't reveal itself if it's brought with charge.
Right. And not with love and gentle compassion. Yeah.
Yeah, and for me, the way it came to me at some point when I started being quite, like when I practiced my sensitivity quite a bit, and I was like, oh, I had this sense that I can shoot people now with the truth about them, but I still got a lot of charge back, and it didn't land well. And the picture I got was, oh, if I'm going to shoot someone, I need to hold them at the same time. So there needs to be that like loving holding quality and a directed like, this is my truth quality.
Right.
And it has this like, there's almost always truth in my sensed experience of someone else, and the story I have is almost always wrong.
Mm.
So it's like, if I can separate those, it seems to support me and getting more connection in my life, which is what I want.
Yeah, there's a lot of truth there. I'm like, just like taking a second to drink that in.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do feel that I'm in a mode of just like throwing stuff at you that I find interesting or fascinating or cool about the practice. I'm kind of enjoying it.
I am too, actually.
I'm greatly enjoying it.
I want to mention one more thing that I find quite spectacular and that keeps coming up for me these days. It's like the biggest problem I experience with myself, or like the times when I'm the most in trouble in my life, seems to be when I believe that my suffering is unique. So that is like the way I'm suffering is very special, and nobody will ever understand me, and I'm alone in it somehow. And then there's a way in which these relating practices support me in seeing that that's not true at all. That is like, yes, in one way, my particular brand of suffering is unique, like my life story is unique, but then everyone is suffering.
Yeah.
And have their own like storyline for it, but like, well, we definitely share that human condition in some way. And when I hold that perspective rather than like, I'm super unique in my suffering, when I manage to hold like, oh yeah, everyone in this room is suffering in their own unique way, it just enables me to be present in a completely different way. Because I'm not inside myself trying to figure out what's wrong with me. It's more like, oh, I'm actually here with you with all the stuff that's going on, and I'd like to hear what's going on for you as well. Because I know that it's also painful for you to be human, and beautiful and spectacular. And like we share the human experience.
Yeah. Yeah, I was listening to Rupert Spira the other day, and he was talking about the felt experience of love, like is the same for everyone in a way. Like there's that the felt experience of love, whether it's for your child or for your romantic partner, or for your mother, it's that felt experience is actually the same. And that makes me think like that yeah, the suffering, even though we have it through our unique filter, the felt experience of suffering and of that deep human pain of being a human being in a body is in some ways the same, the same felt experience, and that we all have that. Just to repeat what you said in using different words.
Mm.
And I think, well, it's important in itself, but the like important point for me in like practicing these things is that I noticed that it supports me to hold that perspective a lot. Like it makes my life so much easier when I don't go around thinking that I'm alone, but that it's actually, no, we're all having this, and it's not. That also makes it a lot less dangerous to just bring it forth, because it's like, yeah, you're probably also experiencing something like this.
Yeah.
And it means that I can hold my particular suffering a bit more lightly and be like, oh yeah, I'm doing this weird thing in my life that seems to create chaos and suffering for me. Like, are you also doing some kind of weird thing that creates suffering in your life? And for me, that.
Oh my gosh, yes.
Yeah, there's like a existential kink perspective I'm hearing in that too, of like, oh yeah, this is my little suffering generating game I'm playing right now.
Yeah,
And
this
like,
is my suffering kink.
right, this is what's getting me the goods right now, and I'm really hurting now with this one. And yeah, there's like almost like a playfulness that you can open up into.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's this edge, I guess, that I take it very seriously, that people that come to my events, or just the people in my life, are really suffering. And I do feel a lot of compassion. And there's a part of me where I hold it quite lightly, and as, yeah, that's like, it's not unique for you. It's like, it seems to be what most people are experiencing. And I want to be with you in your experience. And if you want to stay like with the contraction of your unique suffering, then yeah, that's all right. I do that sometimes also. And if you want to just share it, or have it in presence or in consciousness with a group or with me, then that's also beautiful. And then often there's power on the other side, or just beauty, in my experience, of like just people's uniqueness shining through, and like getting to live in the world, which I really adore.
Mm. Yeah, it's interesting. There's a way that suffering is the way you break bread to deeper connection, is by being together in the suffering. And then you kind of get that out of the way, and then there is a freedom that opens up to be very for like a lot more beauty to come in, and a lot more creative energy, and that there's something very freeing once we get real about the suffering going on, and we really don't hide that. It really does sort of break bread, and then yeah, and then you kind of are able to move beyond it or something.
Yeah, there's definitely some kind of emptying out process for me in that. Like, I don't know, the movement comes from body practices, but it has this like going from this like taking all kinds of stuff on and like packing it down into my body as tension or whatever. Then instead, like really trying to get it out as soon as it enters me. It's like, oh, this is actually painful. Or I'm angry with you now, or I don't want this right now, or whatever it is, like really trying to keep myself light and fluid, which is very connected to the Tai Chi, rather than just like getting really heavy and like contracted in myself. It's like, oh, I can just be here because there's not that much in me that I'm holding on to and I need to deal with. So there's like, oh, I can. Then this is of course an attainment. It's not how I am all the time, but this how empty can I be of stuff? So it's like I'm just receptive to the newness that's coming at me right now. I can be present with it, and that seems to be like the path I want to be on.
The path I want to be on too, Peter.
Yeah.
We want to be. Let's be on the path together. That reminds me of where we kind of started. Maybe that happened before we pressed record. It was a question I asked, and now I kind of feel like I just now received the lesson or the teaching in it or something. Of those first, especially that first year circling, where I was like making myself sick because I was packing it all in. I didn't know how to free it out of me. And then slowly but surely I am having that experience of that lighter, like more empty, like when I really check in, I actually am not harboring as much as, I mean, it used to be like just so deep that I was, weighed down and sick. And yeah. So I that was a visual that the way that you described it, and it sort of just came full circle for me. Yeah. Like that.
There's this cool quote from the Gospel of Thomas that I often refer to. And it's something like, if you bring forth what is inside of you, what is inside of you will save you. But if you don't bring forth what is inside of you, what is inside of you will destroy you. I really like that one. It's like it encapsulates a lot of what we've been talking about.
It really does. That's beautiful.
That is beautiful. That's the...
Should we end on that?
Yeah, I think that's the clincher right there. Yeah. That's the picking the fruit when it's ripe.
The good news of Thomas.
Yep. Peter, thank you so much for coming on the container and sharing your wisdom with our audience and with us first and foremost.
Yeah.
And I'm curious if people want more of you, or if there are there services of yours they can seek out? Is there a way that they can get more Peter in their life?
Well, I do loads of workshops these days, like weekend workshops, circling and surrender leadership. We've just done 2 retreats here in Norway. We'll likely do a lot more retreats next year. If they're in Copenhagen, they can always seek me out. I do a bit of body therapy and that kind of stuff as well. I've written a bit on Medium about circling and surrender leadership. Maybe that could be interesting for some. But my name is recognizable, so I can also easily be Googled.
The container is now closed. Peter Munthe-Kaas is just this walking advertisement for Circling Europe and surrendered leadership in general. And he helps build out our series of interviewing Circling Europe All-Stars, which we are happily continuing to grow. Peter's insights into how Tai Chi can help map what is going on in circling, and how it can give us tactics for navigating that space, is the exact kind of insight Sai and I created the container to feature. We're really grateful to the time and wisdom that Peter shared with us. If you want to support more of these in-depth conversations being recorded and shared far and wide, you know what to do, people. Go to patreon.com/thecontainer. Become a monthly supporter. And with that, we have a nice way of closing. Keep it namaste.